Okay,
And we'll.
good evening. Call the policy committee meeting for FAMPO to order Monday, September 18th, 2023, 6 p.m. If we could please stand, if you're able, for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we have a roll call, please.
Yes, Meg Bonke.
Here.
Corey Hayes. Here. Jason Graham.
He's just stepped out for a.
Tim Faruqi.
Here.
Monica Gary. Here. Matt Curley. Jacob Lane. Marcy Parker. Here. Bob Schneider.
Here.
Sylva Nooch. Here. Chris Yakubowski.
Here.
David Brown. Tom Cohen. Daryl English. Deborah Frazier. Evan Marshall. Tim McLaughlin. Steve Ross. Michelle Shropshire. Joe Stainsby. Quorum is present.
All right.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to also draw the attention to the policy committee that we did invite Carolina and King George counties to attend because I was asked to do so because of the future funding workshop. So we'd just like to recognize the folks from King George County and so on in the meeting tonight. And also I invited Chip Boyle from the GWRC Executive Director because that particular workshop might also affect GWRC localities. So just to
Awesome.
recognize them in the room. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. And I see we also have Laura Sellers, our CTV member here. So thank you for attending. All right, approval of the agenda for this evening.
We have one small amendment.
Okay. So I have a motion, and is there a second?
You can't do it.
You can't do it. So Bob will take your second. Thank you. Ian.
Item 8A is meant to say action item on the agenda. You saw the item last month, so it's not a new item. You've already seen it. We just committed to say action item on that item, but it does need to be an action item. It's the CMAC STGB process, and the call for projects has begun, so we do need to accept the. And I believe
yes,
Spotsy has a.
yes, Madam Chair, if we could break apart resolution 24-06
Okay,
and have the river crossing project voted on separately,
correct.
that would be much appreciated, just so we can stay consistent.
Okay, and we'll call the river cross. We'll call that, want to call it?
Just have it 8B1 and 8B2, so the rest of it is resolution is 1, and then the river crossing you can call B2.
All right, any other amendments, changes? Okay, with those changes, Crystal Vanucci and Bob, do you accept those? All right, thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. That motion carries. We move right into public hearings. We do have 2 public hearings tonight. Comments and questions from members of the public are welcome at this time related to the following. Item A is amendments to the fiscal year 21-24 Transportation Improvement Program to add 3 projects. UPC 123-908 River Crossing Parkway NEPA Alternative Study, SMART 24 Route 1 and Exit 126 southbound improvements, and UPC 119-112 number SMART 22, that's I-95 Exit 126 STAR Study improvements. Are there any public comments related to A? Yes, sir.
Good evening, members of the FAMPO Policy Committee. I'm Al Watkins. I live at 12 England Run Lane, 22406, within the George Washington District of Stafford County. Because of the public comment period of time, according to Resolution 2406, to end in just 2 days, I'm here to represent not only those living in my England Run Sanford Drive neighborhood, but all who live in the southwest portion of the George Washington District, an area of the county that will be asked to absorb many future changes over these coming years that will greatly impact the entire Fredericksburg region. All that we in that area ask for is transparency, extensive communication, and involvement, particularly the opportunity to provide pertinent input towards decisions that will be made, not only regarding the proposed Rappahannock River Crossing Parkway, but also related issues such as the rezoning of agricultural land within our area, like the 160.7 acres located between Sanford Drive and Warrenton Road that Belmont Park LLC has requested. Those who live along the Warrenton Road Route 17 corridor fully recognize the congestion that was so aptly mapped by Mr. Condor Anderson's 3D map and traffic volume displayed at this group's August meeting. As the predominant pathway for large commercial trucks on their journeys to and from I-95, we can only imagine how our driving life would be so improved without these behemoths mixed in amongst our local transportation needs. My neighbors understand that the need for a solution remedying this congestion that we already experience, and that a bridge parkway jumps out, like the study will investigate, as everyone's prime solution. We would ask that providing commercial traffic an opportunity, a path, bridge and parkway to navigate elsewhere might be the priority for this regional solution. It is essential that Mr. Anderson's very tall 2.04 VC ratioed, very purple ribbon along Warrenton Road not grow in height and become much more peachy pink. Further, I can't envision that the height and color change occurring if Belmont Park LLC is enabled to fulfill their 160-acre plan to construct large warehouses and facilities that are dependent upon bringing more 18-wheelers and large commercial vehicles along this nightmarish congested Route 17 area. Surely a better regional community-minded solution can be found for that acreage. And finally, I'd like to give thanks to the two separate supervisors on this FAMPO committee who have taken the time to meet with me and my neighbors at our request and to directly hear our concerns and see what life is like on England Run Lane and Sanford Drive. Thank you for your time.
All right, any other comments? Thank you, sir. We will, close the public comment on that one.
Have a comment.
Correct?
What's happening?
It's
Is there somebody online that would like to speak?
if there is, they're called guest, so I'm unsure.
Okay.
Guest, are you
If-
there? Would you like to speak?
Okay, we'll move on to item B. The second public hearing is amendments to the fiscal year 24-7 Transportation Improvement Program to add 2 new Virginia Passenger Rail Authority projects. The 20299 Virginia State Supported Amtrak Operations and Potomac Creek Third Track South, in quotation, siding A. Is there anybody here that would like to speak on this public hearing? Okay, seeing none, we'll close that public hearing, and we will move on to their public comments that were in the agenda package prior to the meeting. Were there any in there, Mr. Olis?
No.
There were none.
Okay, I didn't think so, just wanted to confirm. Okay, now we have regular general public comment. If there is anybody from the public here that would like to address the board on any other matter. Okay, seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That motion carries.
Yep.
Okay, we're moving right along. Wow, this might be our shortest meeting ever. We're moving on to the action item. Under action and discussion, the first item will go to Mr. John Rideout. This is CMAQ and STBG.
In progress.
Good evening. So these are, presented in the last meeting were the changes to the map. We can go to the next slide. There have been no major changes since the last meeting. The eligible applicants, the number of applications, and how we're distributing the CMAQ, STBG, and carbon reduction funds remains the same. What happened at the most recent TAC was, the next slide, They did a small amount of technical changes. Probably the one that would be the most interest to the policy committee would be this fourth bullet here. They just specified that if should a new source of funding becoming available, much like the carbon reduction funds became available last year, that they'd be applied to either existing funding projects or that they'd be applied to projects that have been submitted through the caller project. So we wouldn't open a new call for projects and require new projects to come in to compete for those dollars. We'll go to the existing fund. And finally, just of note that the methodologies seeking approval today were unanimously endorsed by the TAC in September. That's it.
It took many months to do, and we were very happy that the TAC unanimously endorsed it because I didn't at one point think that was going to happen. So we're very glad.
Awesome. Any questions for John? All right, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, we need a motion.
Yes, please.
So moved.
All right, in a second.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on CMAC and SCBG? All right, seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any against? Any abstentions? Okay, that motion carries. Thank you. Okay, we'll go on to resolution 2406. This one we've split apart. I'm going to call the UPC 123908 River Crossing Parkway, the NEPA alternative study. I'm going to call that resolution 24-06A. Okay, is there a motion for that?
So moved.
resolution? Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Try not to.
Okay, all right, discussion. Anybody want to discuss this item?
Not a new item. I think everybody knows.
Okay,
Talked out.
all right. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Any abstentions?
Sound like this, do you?
Okay, no abstentions. Okay, so we had one vote against. That is correct.
Correct.
Okay, got it. The next item is, we'll call this,
B.
yep, resolution 2406B. It has two items here. Smart 24 Route 1 and Exit 126 southbound improvements and UPC 119112. Smart 22 I-95 Exit 126 Star Study improvements. Okay. Is there a motion for that? Thank you, Monica.
Second.
Okay.
Okay. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that motion passes unanimously. We are moving on to recommended amendments to the Community Engagement and Equity Plan. Ian, this was something that came up in my conversation with Ian at our last meeting regarding the reading. Although we appreciated the reading of the public comments at the meeting, it does take a lot of time, and I think there's a better way for us to include public comment in our, so that everybody knows what the public comment is. I believe it should be included in our board packets, and then if there are packets of all the materials, it can be included there as well. So I asked Ian if he could look into maybe some amendments to that. So Ian?
Thanks, Madam Chair. We're putting two things into this amendment. The CEEP is the Community Engagement and Equity Plan. And the reason why we couldn't just change this is because it specifies how we do community engagement, right? So tonight we're asking you to put out for public comment two amendments to the CEEP. It does require a long public comment period, so we can't just make this change without a public comment period. Carly, if you can just go back to the actual amendment there. What staff have suggested is the following. We would, instead of what it says now, which is read by staff in the meeting, we would change it to attached to the email agendas and printed agendas, and staff would read a brief summary. What we mean by that is we'd give you like one sentence for every letter that we received. Mrs. Jones sent a letter saying we need light rail. John Smith said we want to have a new roadway, so that you get a verbal, like one sentence per, so that it reminds you of what's in the pack, and we've stated on the record that so-and-so sent the letter. So we're not doing nothing. You're getting it on email, you're getting it printed in the pack, and you're getting a one-sentence summary for each letter that we receive. That's the proposal. Are you happy with that? I have a second amendment that I'll go to in a moment. Should I do them both?
Let's go ahead and do both
Okay,
of
the
them, then
second
we'll
one,
discuss.
slowly just scroll down. We are suggesting that we change the public comment period for items that get added to the tip. You remember that the tip basically puts all projects from state partners and local funded projects into the transportation improvement program, and no one is allowed to spend a cent until that project is in the tip. So it's an important document. However, typically by the time we get to the tip, this has been in a study, or it's been in a public hearing, or it's been at one of our multiple of our committees. So we generally don't get public comments when we add something to the tip. We get them long before it gets to adding the thing to the tip. So we've got the public comments before we get to this point. However, what we are finding is that we get lots of these little tip amendments. If the project price changes and VDOT needs us to change the tip to reflect the new price, we have to go through the whole public comment period again on a project which we've already had public comment in because we're changing something. If DRPT are changing something on one of the rail station upgrades, that changes the price. We've got to go change the tip again. So we're suggesting that we reduce the 30-day public comment period to 20 days for a very specific reason. Tonight, you're approving things that we haven't yet reached the 30th day of a 30-day public comment period. And we've put a clause in there saying, on advice from VDOT, that this matter is approved unless we get a negative comment in the next 48 hours until the 30-day public comment period is closing. Why? Because there weren't 30 days between the two policy committee meetings, there were only 28 days. So to avoid that, we're suggesting that just for the tip, not for all the other documents that come to FAMPO, just for the tip, we change it to a 20-day public comment period. And I know the immediate question is, why not 21? And the reason for that is February. Because February doesn't have 30 or 31 days. It has, well, it depends on whether it's a leap year or not. It changes. And so if we put 21 days, if this matter happened between February and March, we would still not have a full period between the two policy committee meetings. So the only purpose here is to try and expedite the process of putting things in the tip. We do have to have a public comment period. It's required, but there's nothing in law that specifies how long that public comment period has to be. So we are suggesting that we change this from 30 days to 20 days. All the other public comment periods that FAMPO has will still remain 30 days, but just adding projects to the tip, we're suggesting that you change the public comment period because it's just adding a thick document you already know about to the tip so that they can continue construction or whatever it is they're doing. So that's our two suggested amendments. We'd like to hear whether the policy committee is in agreement or not.
Okay, thoughts from?
And this change has to go out for 45 days, I'm afraid, for public comment. So
Okay.
it's going to take us 45 days for the public to tell us whether they're okay with this before you can approve it. We're asking you to start the public comment tonight.
Okay,
But if you don't agree with those amendments, then tell us and we can.
I mean, I'll just mention that in Stafford County, and I'm sure we all do things differently, our public comment all goes into our, we get them from our clerk the night before every comment. Every public comment that comes in. We don't read anything, but it all comes to every board member via email. And then
And you don't read it out loud. We actually read it before.
we read them.
I don't know about you,
Right.
but.
Right, and it becomes a part of the public record.
It of course
So-
doesn't change the length of time that we allocate to people who come in person or who are online. Somebody's online, they can still make the public comment in the meeting, or if they come to the meeting, they can still make public comment in the meeting. We don't change that. We're just changing whether we read laboriously word for word through every written comment. But that's our suggested compromise.
Okay, thoughts?
So move.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to have a public hearing on this. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, we'll move forward with that public comment. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, next item is Ian, DPL funding formula scenarios.
So this is largely good news, and why I'm telling you this is because I'm seeking your advice or mandate as the policy committee. Technically, the state of Virginia gets to decide how it wishes to allocate PL funding, what we call PL funding. This is the funding that we use to pay for the rent for the building, our portion, FAMPO's portion of the rent of this building, pay for our services, pay for computers, pay the staff salaries. So it's the operational expenses of FAMPO. We get an allocation from two main sources. The PL source comes from the Department of Transportation, and then we get another source, which is called, we call it 5303, Section 5303 of the Act, which comes from the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. The state has to decide how much money to give each one of the MPOs in the state of Virginia. It's not up to us. I need to emphasize that it's not up to us to decide. The state gets to decide. However, the law requires them to consult. So part of the consultation, they called a meeting and they called all the heads of the MPOs to an online meeting, and they asked me to give them comments, and they wanted the comments in 7 days. And I said, no, I'm not going to give you comments in 7 days because I need to consult. First of all, I wanted to take it to the TAC to see if the TAC had any comments. And the second thing is to ask you all if you have any comments. And so that's why it's here tonight, to ask you if you have any comments or to give me a mandate to go and argue on your behalf about this. I don't get a vote either, right? The state gets to decide this, but they're required to at least ask us our opinion. So in your pack, there are 6 different options that VDOT has proffered as alternatives for how we can allocate the money across all the MPOs. And then the Virginia Association of MPOs came up with a 7th option. And so in the front, you've got the proposal from FAMPO, which is a compromise. And if you scroll down one more page, there's the compromise. So you can see there, Fredericksburg, 2023 is the funding we got this year based on the old formula, right? Then if you look at 2025 through to 2027, it's based on the new formula, which is linked to population. Except that because using the new formula based on the new population numbers of our urbanized area, about 5 MPOs were going to lose money, right? And one of the big losers is the Hampton Roads MPO. They would lose over $100,000. And remember, this is the money we pay staff salaries for. So you don't want big swings, big changes, because it's difficult to budget for staff, to pay the rent, to pay the water and electricity bill if your amount allocation keeps changing. So FAMPO proposed this compromise solution. And what it does is, in the first year of the new funding formula, 2025 and 2026, they are smoothing in the drop for those MPOs that are going to lose money. VDOT's proposal didn't do that. VDOT's proposal changes from 2025 funding to the new funding formula. In our case, whichever option we choose, our PL funding would increase, right? It would go up. Whichever option they choose, it'll go up. But for about 5 MPOs, they would lose money. So this is the FAMPO compromise. What it does is, in 2025, it effectively adds money to the losers from the general pot, and then adds a little less to the losers in the general pot in 26. And then by 2027, we're back to what the population figures would determine our allocation would be. So it's a smoothing of the blow to those who would suffer, in inverted commas, if you like. And it's complicated, but it's based on increasing what we call the base. The base is everybody first gets $50,000. and then we take the rest and divide it up based on population, right? So the bigger you are, the more funding you get. So the proposal is to increase the base to $75,000 instead of $50,000 per annum per year. And then the proposal by FAMPO is to smooth in the first 2 years so that those who lose the most lose a bit less and get time to adjust their staffing plan and their whatever plan to this. Scroll down, please. So that's FAMPO's proposal. Now, this is the only other slide I'm going to show you. This shows you the 6 scenarios. Scenario 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that VDOT has proposed. And if I can quickly just run over here, the FAMPO proposal is based on this one. Right? So instead of having the $50,000 base, which we have now, it increases your base allocation to $75,000, but not $100,000. And I asked them, why are we not basing it on the $100,000 base? And they said, because Hampton Roads loses too much if we make the base $100,000. Effectively, the total amount of funding is increased by a small amount, but because our population numbers grew so much, we're getting more of that increase than everybody else is getting. That's the net effect. If you look at these in detail, which I don't ask you to do now because it's lots of numbers, you will see that whichever option we pick, FAMPO's PL funding will increase. Might increase by only a small amount if we choose that option, or a larger amount if we choose one of the other options. So it's a question of the impact on us not being huge, and it's in a positive direction. Just one caveat, and I think Chip Boyle would like me to say this, whether he hasn't asked me to, but I know he'll like me saying this. Just bear in mind that there is a local match. Chip, is it 10%? I think. So there's a 10% local match on these funds. And how the match is made up now is the contributions you make once a year to GWRC, that pot is used for the 10% match on all of these funds, right? So there will be a slight increase needed on the local contributions from the jurisdictions in order for us to access these, which are federal dollars. So just want you to bear that in mind. So it's not a case of just let's grab as much as we can get, because there is a 10% match that applies, which you are contributing to right now, but there would be a slight increase in that annual amount that you contribute to GWRC, and a portion of that goes to fund the match on this. It's very complicated. I know there are lots of moving balls here. I'm not expecting you to become fully conversant with all these numbers. All that I'm asking for you to do is give me guidance, because they're going to ask me to go back and give an opinion. And so I want it not to be my personal opinion, I'd like it to be our collective opinion. The TAC didn't really have much comment because the impact is not negative for us, and it's not a huge impact. It's nice if we get the best option for FAMPO, but it's likely that the other MPOs would, particularly the bigger ones, would not like that option because it's going to be taking money from some of them to fund our increase, if I can tell you, put it like that. And there are some MPOs that get very little because they cross borders. So they have some of their MPO in Virginia and some of it in Tennessee or Maryland or whatever. And so they tend to not get as much money as the rest of us because they have got these cross-border jurisdictions. But they are still required to complete all the federal processes in both states. So they do have more work than we do for the federal regulations that they have to abide by. They have to have 2 long-range transportation plans or 2 whatever else. Anyway, I'm not going to talk anymore. I wanted to wrap it up quickly. But just to ask you if you have any guidance for me, whether we want to go with a FAMPO option or whether we want to take a reasonable option in the middle, or whether you want me just to push for the highest amount of money we can get for FAMPO, or whatever the case is. There is a case to be made, however, for the very small MPOs. They've been getting very little money, and they still have to do all the same federal requirements that we have. So we do have a little bit of sympathy for them.
All right, thank you, Ian. All right, thoughts by committee members? Yes, Marcy.
Not to open an old wound, Have all the members of GWRC paid all their dues up to date from previous years and everything that they owe each year?
There's the experts that are there.
Yes,
But everybody's paid up to date.
everybody on the.
In the current cycle.
At least for I can speak for 2.5 fiscal years. All of the jurisdictions have paid the full, we call the per capita rate. There are some additional requested separate from this, go into there, but then, yes, all jurisdictions.
For the basic dues,
So that was
not
like.
necessarily for
legislative
those extra items.
fees.
The big one was the fund balance.
Oh, right,
contribution
right.
That
Okay.
a couple of jurisdictions chose not to fund. But the per capita rate that, goes towards the FAMPO PL 5307 5303 matches is fully paid by all the jurisdictions.
Okay.
Just checking, so that if it goes up, that the localities will continue to pay.
They will, and we did a presentation.
They did a presentation.
Last month, we have not increased that rate in 15 years. I think that's, yes, 15 years. So we're looking at a 15% rate because one of the, even without this increase, the annual increase for the FAMPO grants, both PL and 5303 have increased at a higher rate than our populations have increased. And so we've kept the same rate for 15 years, very similar to y'all's tax rates. Your tax rates stay the same a lot of times, but your assessed value goes up. Well, for us, our rate stays the same, but the population has been increasing. But the VDOT grants and DRPP grants have risen faster. So we're at the point now with only about $2,000 that would be available for increased grants, or we would have to say to VDOT, you can offer us more, we can't match it, so we couldn't take it. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I hope that
Yeah.
went too long.
Okay. All right, thank you for that question. Okay, others, feedback, please.
It's just an approach. You don't have to say that specific
Right.
line is the one I have to give you. If you just guide me on the approach, then I'll give that feedback.
Yes,
So did you say you were suggesting scenario 2?
No,
Is that, which
I'm
one was
saying
yours?
that FAMPO is suggesting using scenario 2, but allowing it to smooth in over 2 years. Because this is going to be a 10-year, every 10 years they review this.
so it's moving
So
over two, not three.
FAMPO has taken scenario 2 and then adjusted it to smooth in over 2 years so that those who are going to lose money have 2 years to adjust their costs so that they can accommodate the loss. But it's based on scenario 2, which is a $75,000 base for every MPO, and then the balance of the money gets divided by population, and it's the population in the urbanized area, not the population in total. So that's why that big census fight that we had last year was so important, because if the census changes the criteria of what they consider urban, it takes money either away or adds money to us. Luckily for us, our general population went up by 40,000 in the urbanized area, and so therefore our allocation is going to go up. It could have gone the other way.
Okay. So in some respects, you know, do we want to play in the sandbox with everybody else in the MPO and then give Hampton Roads and
We could.
one or two other players an opportunity to kind of adjust? Or do we want to be greedy and say, no, our area is dying on the vine because transportation is our #1 issue and we need to address these and we need these monies? I mean, really, that's what it's all about. If you look at it in simplistic terms, right?
Yes.
Not looking at the politics or anything like that.
Madam Chair, I believe if I'm reading this and I'm interpreting all,
Okay,
no matter what happens, correct me if I'm wrong, FAMPO ends off better off no matter what the scenario. It's just how much grace do we wish to have in the process?
correct.
Correct. We get a better deal whichever option is chosen.
Right. Because we've had population.
because we've had a population increase.
And a
Yes.
comment, having run an agency who has had moments like this, and I believe GWRC has or will have moments like this. It is good to be gracious in moments like this when we have the opportunity. Every local government agency is going to face this at one point in time. We hope we have the grace when our moment comes. Others feel the same way. So I'm in favor of a transitionary period just to allow those other organizations to address the issue, adjust, and adapt. That is my motion moving forward.
Okay, and I think this is just a recommendation.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah,
So
we don't need to
Just a
vote. It's just a
recommendation.
discussion,
Mm.
but I appreciate your comments. And
withdraw the effort of the motion.
I would, go ahead, Chris.
I just say, I agree, there's no reason to be jerks about it. I mean, and honestly, in the big scheme of things, we're not talking about a lot of money.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So we can adapt, we can, deal with it. It's not that big of a deal. But, I hope that future boards will remind our, fellow neighbors throughout the Commonwealth with, how we acted, so they can
Right.
reciprocate when necessary.
Treat others the way you hope they will treat you
Exactly.
later. So that's kind of the way our mothers taught us, right? We would hope. Okay, so does everybody agree? All right.
Thank you.
Okay, you have your recommendation there.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, now, workshop.
Yes.
So future funding options for transportation projects, and we tried to keep this agenda very short, and here we are at 6:36. So Ian, I'm going to turn it over to you.
That's the quickest policy committee meeting we've had since I've been.
Bar is now high.
Now we're gonna risk it.
Yeah.
But
Now we have 2.5 hours.
to have this discussion and
Not here to 2:30.
we're glad that we have folks from county here. So the question is future funding. Now, we've been talking through this year about what is our vision, what are the principles that we have, what are the priorities we want to set for transportation. We haven't nailed those down yet, but we've been talking about those. And then what sort of projects would that encourage, right? So if you have priorities, you then align your projects with those priorities. We hope that we'll do that. So there we go. We've been going through those throughout this year. Now we get to talk about how do we fund all of this? Whatever we decide are our priorities and our projects, we'll need to fund them. And that's what the discussion tonight is about. And I'm going to do these slides and then I'm going to sit down because it's really, the purpose of this is to encourage you all to think, to debate, to discuss, and to slowly give guidance so that we can go into the future. Next slide. So these are the kinds of questions I'm hoping we will start to answer tonight. We're not going to vote on anything, but we're going to start to discuss these, I hope, and maybe others that are allied to this. Going after additional federal or state grants than what we do now. Should we increase our effort to go after federal and state grants? And then the question is, should we do that as FAMPO or GWRC, or should you do it as localities, right? That's a debate. You can carve up the cake in multiple ways. How best to raise and use local match funds. And you'll see later on, there's frequently a match for just about everything that we do. Now and again, we get lucky and we get a federal grant that doesn't require a match, but generally everything requires some match from somewhere. Spoke to that already. Whether and to what degree to support a regional transportation authority. Is this something we want to explore, or no, we don't want to go there? Do we need consultants to assist with the larger, more complicated applications? That means a consultant actually puts the application together for us. The larger projects, those applications are complicated and you have to produce a lot of supporting documents. We don't retain an engineer in this office in order to design engineering drawings for a roadway, right? So are we going to use consultants and go after more complicated applications? Are we going to leave that to the jurisdictions, etc.? Or should we be employing staff or interns to help us go after additional grants? We staff up for the need and for the funding we have available for that need, right? That's what we do now. Next slide. This is the thing. Federal grants, there are some exceptions, but they tend to be small exceptions. There are some exceptions, but generally federal grants give you 80% of the money. And there's that 20% shortfall, right? So let's say it's a roadway, you want to build a road. The federal government will give you 150 million if you win the grant bid. But then there's going to be a 20% match. On 150 million, it's 30 million local match you have to come up with. You might not just have that lying around. So how do you fund that? There are all kinds of ones. There's the SS4A we're busy with now. There was a match. The mega grants, infrastructure grants, and raise grants, those are very big grants. They usually award $200 million for a project, $100 million for a project. These are big federal grants. There are state grants. You know about CMAC and SDGB and the carbon reduction funding and the highway improvement funding. You know about smart scale. In terms of getting the local match, we have to talk about what the best ways are of doing that. There are revenue sharing projects that you know about that have a match. They're formula funds. For example, the secondary road 6-year plan funds. These are all the types of funds that we can access, your jurisdictions can access in order to put another turning lane, change the intersection, build a road, whatever it is, a bike path that we need. Next slide. So smart scale changes are coming, and I'm glad our C2B member is here tonight. We don't know the detail of how it's going to change. We've got the proposals, we've heard lots of proposals, but they still have to, workshop and argue and come to some agreement, and I hope we'll hear some good things when the agreement is reached, but we don't know exactly what's going to happen. The trend seems to be that larger regional projects are being emphasized in terms of what MPOs and regional commissions can apply for. So FAMPO gets a number of slots, GWRC gets a number of slots. It's been 4 each to now, so 8. So we could submit 8 projects. It seems as though those are going to have to be larger, more regional projects than they were in the future. So we can't take the project that your locality has got extra, like an intersection upgrade, and put that in as our smart scale project for FAMPO, because it might not be seen as a regional project or a larger project, right? So we have to think about how these trends are going to affect us. Also, we suspect that there's going to be a greater emphasis on a need for local match on projects. It doesn't say anywhere you have to have local match, so don't go looking for that statement. However, the cost benefit analysis is going to have a greater role if the proposals are accepted. There are 3 different buckets in which they score and allocate money when the projects have been scored and they've got a pile of money. They have 3 steps in the process to allocate it to the winners. Step 2 is being removed. So there are going to only be 2 steps in the process if the staff recommended proposal is adopted. And the second bucket was the one where our regional projects got funded the most, and it paid less attention to the cost benefit analysis. The step that is going to remain for regional projects specifically pays attention to the cost benefit analysis. So it doesn't say anywhere that you have to have a local match, but we think that local match is going to have a greater role in that cost benefit analysis. So you need Garrisonville Road built. Sorry to jump on a sore point, but you're going to have to think about this local match when you're dealing with bigger projects like that.
Bad example. They had a match. You have the match.
The match will go to Enon Road.
I knew that. I knew that would get you talking. All right. What are the sources for local match, right? Direct jurisdictional funds, your general funds. If you've got the money, well, then you've got the match. You could issue local bonds. But of course, every time you have a new pile of projects you have to get built, you're going to have to get another bond, because as time goes on, you need more money. The Regional Transportation Authority, which we've done some work on and we're going to show you tonight, is another possible way to get a local match. Or you go the toll road route. I mean, I know it was tried 15 years ago at FAMPO and it never got off the ground, but you can have a toll road because then the money that comes in on the toll goes to pay the cost of the project. So that is a way to get around that. Should we go the RTA route? I don't know. It could significantly increase the funds we have for local match. We could build some projects that do not succeed in the smart scale scoring system. We could proceed with some larger projects. And then there's this question of value capture, which I want to talk about in a moment, which has to do with claiming back some of the benefits that we give the public in the area, right? When we build a new piece of transportation infrastructure, we're helping the public. We're giving the general public this new facility, a new road, a new train station, whatever the case that is. Next slide. So value capture, it's a type of public financing that recovers at least part of the value that the public infrastructure generates for the community. I'll give you an example of how this is being contemplated in New York City. They're drawing a circle on the map around a new transit station. So they build a subway in New York, they build a new station. All the properties around that station tend to go up in value when you open a new station on the subway in New York City. And that amount is seen as an increased value for the landowners. So what value capture tries to do in New York City is to say, okay, well, within a short walking distance, those properties are going to increase in value dramatically because we're putting in public infrastructure. Those landowners should contribute a part of the cost to build that station. They never recover the 100% of the value, but they recover part of the cost by using an instrument that is a value capture instrument. And I just want to put the concept out there. If you go back in time, many of the first streetcars and trams in the US were constructed by developers so that they could push the city further out. Why do you want to push the city further out? Because the land is cheaper further out. So if you want cheaper land to build housing or more available land, you have to go further out. But before everybody had an automobile, if you want to build further out, how do you get people to the shops, to the schools, to the whatever else? So often, not always, but often real estate conglomerates would build a streetcar so that they could develop land further out, right? This burden was not put on the general taxpayers. The land developer paid the cost of the construction of that. Eventually, those got either removed and shut down in favor of automobiles, or they were joined together in some of the transit systems. So in Boston today, for example, those trolleys became part of what is the Green Line in Boston today. And in about 1920 or 1930, Boston had the largest electric tram system in the world, right? Before some of it was ripped up. Today, developers probably contribute less to the transportation improvements. There's always exceptions, but less than perhaps was done when those streetcars were built. People traveling through our region, and here's the main point, people traveling through our region are not contributing directly to the cost of the roadway improvements. Yes, if they buy gasoline somewhere, there's a small federal amount that they are contributing towards, but they're not contributing towards our local roads. Okay? And so value capture says, is that fair? Should they not contribute a small amount to our local roads that they're going to drive on? I'll leave it there. Next slide. In our region, taxing fuel, sales taxes, the transient occupancy tax can be seen as a form of generalized value capture. You're saying if you drive through our region, we think you should contribute just a little bit towards the cost of our transportation infrastructure. Or if you go through our region in whatever way, trucks come through our region with freight. And how do you capture that value? Well, you've either got to tax the gasoline that they purchase in the region, or the diesel, or whatever, or you have to tax the sandwiches they buy at lunchtime, or the whatever it is, right? So you either have a tax that captures sale, or you capture through the gasoline sales, or you put up a toll road. And currently we have toll roads effectively on the HOV lanes, right? It's effectively a toll. They're contributing to that highway, but they're not contributing to US 1. They're not contributing to Route 3. They're not contributing to US 17. So, looking at that, we could potentially use an RTA to try to capture back a little portion of that value for the rest of the transportation infrastructure that we have to provide. There are other ways of doing this. You can have special assessments, tax increments. You can do that they do in New York. You can draw a box on the ground and say, we're going to put a new road through your neighborhood. Those people who benefit the most should contribute to pay the cost of that thing. They call them tips, right? You can do that. Some regions don't like that. There are all kinds of ways that you can do that. But the point is, you're trying to capture back some of the value that you're giving to the community by building infrastructure. Next slide. So, you've seen these because we sent them to you at home. Those are the regional transportation authorities that exist in Virginia now. We've kind of highlighted the counties and cities that fall into each of them. The Northern Virginia one, the Richmond one, it's called the Central Virginia Transportation Authority, and the one at Hampton Roads. Next slide. We are that hole in the donut in the middle. We don't have a transportation authority. And how that is problematic for us is that we are getting an equal share of the congestion problem, but not as much funding as these authorities are bringing in to deal with the problem, to address the problem. So we have to rely on smart scale. We have to rely on local match with revenue sharing grants and so on to build out transportation projects. And projects are getting expensive. Some cases, VDOT is asking for a 40% contingency in case the price goes up, because prices are going up like crazy right now. Projects are getting expensive. Next slide. If we were to become a transportation authority or create a transportation authority in this region, it would fill in that gap in the donut, and then you would have basically the I-95 corridor and the corridor into Hampton Roads covered by some form of claiming back a portion of the money in order to fund our projects, right? Don't know what you want to call it, whatever you like. Call it the Laura
Absolutely.
Laura Sellers Transportation Authority, whatever. In order to try and do that, we could do this. It's been talked about in the past. We've had a couple of delegates to the State House, to the Senate, dumping these bills to do this for us without us, never consulting us, never talking to us, never talking to GWRC, never talking to FAMPO, and that's not helpful. We have no say in that. So part of the discussion tonight is saying, can we actually form an opinion and discuss this before somebody does that again? Because I'm certain they're going to do it again. We have the elections on the 6th of November, and I'm sure, sorry?
7th.
The 7th.
Pardon, the 7th.
Also on the ballot, know the
The
date.
7th of November, we have the elections, and from the 8th of November,
Be on the 6th, the 5th, the 4th.
unfortunately, I don't get a vote.
You better vote.
As soon as they process my citizenship, I'll get a vote, but I don't get one yet. So on the 7th, they'll vote. In the next 2 months, people are going to submit their ideas for legislation to be considered. I'm guessing we're going to get it again, because it's been 2 years in a row we've had somebody do it. I think it's coming again. Next slide. So we had research conducted by Chris Garcia at the University of Mary Washington, supported by the Fredericksburg Regional Alliance and their local partners. We'd just like to thank them publicly because we didn't have to pay for the research. They did it for us. We're very grateful for that. They just asked me to please give you the disclaimer that UMW and FRA are not recommending any of these options as, hey, you better at FAMPO do this. They're just saying, we've conducted the research for you, but we're not telling you that you should do this. It's information for you. It's research for you. That's all it is. So through that discussion, we asked them to look at 4 models, the 3 existing regional transportation authorities, and we also asked them to look at Senator McPike's proposal, which was not approved, it failed. But it had some interesting ideas because it focused on claiming back money which is already taxed in this region, but which is currently given to the Hampton Roads Transportation Authority to spend on roads in their region, in that red region I showed you on the map. So that was a different proposal to the ones we'd got before. That one said, hey, this money is being taxed already in our region. Can we get it back? And that provided a vehicle to get it back. So we thought that was an interesting model to study. Next slide. You've got the full report in your packs. But basically, this table tells you how each one of those systems works in terms of where the money comes from. So that transient occupancy tax, 3 of them have a tax on transient occupancy, and it varies by a percent in each of those cases. The grantor's tax rate, you can see there, McPike proposed 6 cents. We've got 15 cents in Northern Virginia, 6 cents in Hampton Roads. Retail tax rate they all use the same rate, 0.7. Gas tax, these 2 have it. Northern Virginia doesn't have it in this way. They have a slightly different.
Okay, just for comparison, because there's the motor fuels tax, which funds VRE, et cetera. I just pulled up the data. Stafford is for FY23 was budgeted for 4.8 million. Fredericksburg 1.1, Spotsylvania 6.3. So that's what was budgeted. So doing bad public math, that's 8.125, give or take, added if those funds were pulled in. So you're really not doing that apples because of the lack of fuel. So if you were to throw another $14 million into the future charts, did I say that right? Yeah, that would fall in.
They do have gas taxes, but it's a different system. Next slide. Okay, so this is without the gas taxes in Northern Virginia, right? Those numbers, there are gas taxes that function in a different way there that are also included. So that's what they're bringing in per year. And these are rough, sorry, wait, strike what I just said, that's wrong. We use their math, their system, and apply it to the population in our region and those who travel through our region, then these are the numbers that it would bring in our region. So if we use the Richmond model, kind of 60-something million a year would come in. We use the Hampton Roads model, 80 to 90 million a year would come in. We use the Northern Virginia model, this excluding their gas tax, so it is higher than this. And then the McPike model, it's about 18 million. A large chunk of this is already taxed in our region. It's not new taxes, except for one. One of them is a new tax, but the rest of these exist already. That money is, a portion of that money is currently going to Hampton Roads because they have a transportation authority and we don't effectively. I mean, the legislation's got lots of quirks, right? I don't want to get into every little quirk, but basically a lot of this, maybe 16 million of that is going to Hampton Roads now, but it's raised here in your jurisdictions. It's existing taxes. Next slide. So we looked at the UMW model. We've got the spreadsheets and we can make that available to you as well. So you can fiddle with it yourself. And if we add a bit of this and take away a bit of that, you can play with it. But we've ran a couple of scenarios. We use the McPike proposal because it carries lots of current taxes that already exist, but ring fences them for our use, right, in his proposal. So we use that as a base and then we added other things to it to see what that would look like in this region. Next slide. So this is alternative 1, using the transit occupancy tax that he proposed, the grantor's tax that he proposed, and the state legislated funding, which is I think what goes to Hampton Roads. But if we added a retail tax, but not 0.7% like the other jurisdictions currently do, we dropped it to 0.5. We thought it might be better for our region to tax less than the other regions do, right? So it's better for our business. attracts more business if we're not as expensive as the other regions. So it's a lower rate. And that would, add 30 million to that. And then you get the total. So if you take that McPike model and you just add a 0.5% retail tax, it's like 50 million a year. That's one option. Next slide. Another option is, what if we don't do that, but we take the McPike example and we add gasoline taxes. Again, we use the lower rate than the other regions are using, right? So that we are less than what they are. And again, run the numbers per year as to what that would look like. It looks like about in the 30s million per year that would come in using that kind of model. Just for reference, here's a comparison with the other regions. Next slide. And then if you want to see what happens if you do both a retail tax and a gasoline tax, we put in a retail tax and the two gasoline tax, keeping those numbers lower than the other regions. And it takes you to sort of 60 something million. Now let's remember these are projections of the future. We don't have those taxes running now, so we can't give you an actual number. It's not like tomorrow that will be exactly that number. It's a projection based on the population, based on the tax rates, based on those figures. So it's not an exact science, it's a projection. So if it works out to be 1 million less or 1 million more, let's not blame the UMW team who put together a lot of work, right? It's a scenario of what would happen if we use those figures based on this region. Next slide. So some thought starters and then I'm done. Should we be going after more federal and state grants? How should we raise local taxes? Does FAMPO and GWRC get involved, or do you leave it up to your locality staff to do? To what degree do we support a regional transportation authority? Do we need to use more consultants or staff? So those are questions for your discussion. I'm going to sit there now because this is really your meeting. I'm just giving you, my main job description says I should advise. So I've given some advice and I hope you'll discuss those and decide what in the future we should be looking at.
All right, so here we go. There was one thing that you didn't reference up there that has caused, not a big item, that has caused a lot of issues in the whole nation, and that is inflation. And, I remember all of our projects going up, but now it's astronomical. So when I look over there at that column and go, okay, we'd have 50 million, and I'm thinking, how far does 50 million go right now?
1.5 miles.
So, I mean,
No.
it's really concerning. Because of, and I'm just thinking about it on a project in Stafford County, and I'll bring it up, it's Enon Road. Tim, I think we may have worked on it when you were there, and we still can't get that project done because of the inflation cost. I mean, it's mind-boggling. So anyway, I just had to say, when you were talking about things that could change, and I was like, well, if we could have some reduction in inflation costs, that would be really nice. But anyway,
what you just said reminded me of one other thing. When we looked at the gas tax numbers that UMW ran, we thought they were a bit conservative. So we called them and said, hey, it looks to us like you've taken the lower end of the scale. And they said to us, yes, they have. So the gas tax numbers there are a conservative estimate. It could be higher than that. And the reason that we know that is because if you look in the calculations in the report, they've taken the average gas consumption per person in Virginia as the standard. And in this region, gas consumption, we're assuming, is higher than the average for Virginia because 40% of our population commutes to DC. So their gas usage is higher. So those gas figures are conservative. It'll probably be a little bit higher than that. But it's good that we're conservative there. We don't aim for something which is unrealistic.
okay.
Right, but we're moving more towards electric. So you base everything on gas and that goes out the window. Another thing that we constantly do here is we're chasing an idea that we don't even know what the end is. What is all this money going to actually do? Number two, why don't we petition the state? Because this seems like one of those areas in life where we don't question the cost. We just find money to pay for the cost that is constantly rising, constantly going up, and we're not actually seeing what the benefit is of the things that we've done. So over the past 10 years in our region, what roads have improved? How has it improved? What have we done? Because we do not have a plan in the region to move traffic. We don't. It doesn't exist. We're arguing over a bridge that's going to take 25 years to get here. That should have been built 25 years ago. That's going to cost an astronomical amount of money that by the time it's done, we're going to be 3 bridges behind. So we're throwing money at ideas that do they fit together? I don't know. Stafford, you guys, what you're doing in Stafford, and I'm talking about regional stuff, not local stuff, because your local improvements that's fine. But I'm talking about regional stuff. How can we move around the region better? And we don't have those projects. If you look at what we put out, what you guys put out, what Fredericksburg puts out, it's very compartmentalized of this is our stuff, this is your stuff, this is your stuff. We tried on Lafayette Boulevard, and I've worked with Matt for years on it, and it's incredibly expensive to do anything along there, so nothing ever gets done. Well, why is that the only thing that we ever look at? Why don't we ever look at?
We don't have a regional master plan.
Exactly. There's no other projects that we can turn to and say, well, this one is too much if we do this one. But then we need to have, what is the goal of the projects? Because, and it doesn't seem like we do. We want to put a bridge that goes over to Stafford, which is fantastic. What is that going to solve? What does that do? What does that help? Or what is it going to cost us in the future when you put traffic somewhere? Now, the other smaller roads that are off of that now need to be improved, intersections to be improved, all those type of things. We don't seem to have a grasp of that. We just seem to try to do something here that should have been done years ago. And I'm not excluding myself from any of the votes that I've done for growth especially. But we just need to, I think, have a better idea of a long-term plan that actually does something. It needs to move traffic. And it can't just be roads. It does have to integrate transit. I agree with you 100%. But to what end? What are the goals that we're searching for? Because then you can actually put money towards getting that done, because people then will buy into it. They won't buy into it if you're constantly asking them for more and more and more and more and more and more money to do what?
Okay, yes, Jason. This is exactly what the conversation we want to sit here and have.
Well, that's why I figured I'd just jump right in.
Chris, I love it. I love it.
Appreciate you being the icebreaker.
Yes.
So a couple things. Number one, for those who aren't GWRC, I asked at the last meeting for us to begin that kind of a discussion, combining land use and transportation. Housing being such a big issue for the region as well. So I hope we can, maybe bring everybody to the table on that same issue, because I think, FAMPO, GWRC doesn't matter. It's all one giant issue. As far as, some of the larger projects like the bridge, we did do some, there is the traffic analysis, but you're right about the intersections. They don't, you're right about what am I trying to think of? The maintenance schedules, all that kind of stuff. It's, but I think at least with the bridge, I think we did have that, a good analysis of what it does fix. But I do agree with you 100% on where are we going in terms of what our goals are. One thing that I had hoped for with the FXB Go strategic plan, we weren't able to get it in this time, was having a goal of saying with FXB Go, at least, start within the city, but then expand it to the counties of a point to point, and say you can get from this point to this point within 45 minutes and then no more than a 15-minute transfer time. Because that's what studies have shown, that you want people to buy in, they can't be waiting more than 15 minutes. That's what studies have shown, and being able to get somewhere in 45 minutes somewhere within the city, my God, I hope we can be able to achieve that through transit. Otherwise, it's not a real transit network. And I think we can come up with a similar goal in the region, saying that you should be able to get from this point to this point in X amount of time. Because regardless of whether it's by car or by transit, that shouldn't matter. It's just what's going to get me here in the amount of time that I deem acceptable. Otherwise, I'm not going to do this thing. And that's where I think, if we can start by coming up with some high-level goals of being able to get from one area to another area in a certain period of time, then I think the analysis will actually kind of lead itself. We might get to a point where we say, we can't build more roads to get there because that's not going to do it. We need to, take cars off the road because then, like they would talk about the variable speeds with VDOT, how the sand falls through the funnel, faster when there's less of it. So I think if we can start with that, if we can come up with some concrete goals and just point to point time, then we can let some of the experts tell us what is the best way to achieve that. How are we going to mix and match our modes of transportation in order to achieve that? I'd like to start there.
Okay.
I'm going to throw out the rural localities
Yeah.
point. So for one, when you were saying point to point in the transportation, we looked at Fredericksburg, the bus service coming to King George, and it really wasn't a benefit because there wasn't a lot of places to go in a certain amount of time. So for a rural locality to have that point to point, we don't even have the infrastructure for it. So we would have to invest a lot to put in it. So it wouldn't make any sense. We already have people upset about this project or that project, or you're raising my taxes or my water bill. So that would be a part that we would have to figure out for a rural locality. Also for King George, we have at least 2 seats and maybe a 3rd seat coming up, new people. And the hubbub in some of them is that we need to put a moratorium on everything for 2 years and not raise taxes. So a regional plan probably wouldn't even be a thought in their minds if they got elected. So that is another thing to consider. And then for King George and Caroline, how do we benefit? Because for this tax, like, what is it going to do for us? What regional transportation project is there that would work?
Can I ask Coley to pull up that slide?
Yes.
I'm just throwing out things that,
These are good.
I want to show you just one slide about this particular question. This is a presentation that the Richmond people came to do at FAMPO. Yeah, there we go. So we had the Central Virginia Transportation Authority come and do a presentation at FAMPO about 18 months to 2 years ago. And this is just one of their slides. You see those percentages down there? So 50% of the money that comes in is returned to the locality that it comes from, based on what was raised in that locality. So if you need, is it 206 or 208 that connects to
Dahlgren?
yeah, 206.
Yeah.
On the travel demand model, it shows that your road that's going to have the biggest future congestion problem is that road. And particularly where it intersects with the main road coming into Fredericksburg, right? So that roadway is going to need some work, right? I'm not sure if SmartScale is going to fund it or if there's going to be some other way of funding it, but it's going to happen. But this thing here is what they do in Richmond. They give 50% of the money that comes in from the RTA back to the locality to spend on their local projects. It doesn't always have to go into one big pot, and then it goes and gets spent on only one project that's a massive thing on the I-95. You can structure it like this. It could be 40%, it could be whatever you want it to be, but you can structure how you spend the money so that some of it can go onto local projects that local jurisdictions desperately need, and then a big chunk go into the big regional projects that we all need. That's just one way that you can deal with it.
That would be more palatable, but it would have to be so that even if we did not score high in SmartScale, that could be used towards the projects that we think is a need, but maybe the state doesn't feel it's a need, but we know it's a need.
If you have this money and you get proper planning done, it's up to you to spend the money.
Yeah, we don't have to listen to the state at all.
Right, so that's one thing, but the board part, I can't tell you because it depends on who gets elected.
But I
Doesn't everything?
Yeah.
from that perspective, I mean, we can always work with those members and do a big debrief on them, on the transportation issues in the region and what we're trying to accomplish and how we would like to get there. And, you know, then, you know, they've got to understand it themselves and come along or stand on the sidelines. So, but I mean, I appreciate that.
I understand your problem. What's going to happen though is that on the 8th or 9th of November or the 12th of November, whatever, one of the people that gets elected to the state is going to take one of these ideas and say, this is my idea, and this is why I got elected, I'm going to do this, and they're going to dump it. And then my phone's going to blow up, and I'm going to have to call all of you going, what should I say? What should I say? Because now and it'll happen again the following year. So,
Oh, I know, there's 3 others.
so this conversation
Housing.
is meant to say, hey, let's think about this before we get to the end of the year. And then at least there's some thoughts on the table as to how we deal with.
Well, I would say for a locality, being able to use the 50% part would be important.
Okay.
Duly.
All right, others.
So
Lori.
all of these different scenarios that are laid out are increases in taxes, right? So that would be,
Except
the
for the
transient occupancy tax would have to increase
except for the
1%.
portion that McPike pointed out is already being taxed, and it would redirect that money to us.
Okay,
It's already being taxed in your county, but it's not given to you.
okay,
But,
it's going
but
to.
here's
Put in
my
Hampton
concern.
Road pot.
Yeah, but here's my concern with that, Ian, is I'm not sure we can hang our hat on that. I mean, in Stafford, we have tried to have legislation for the last 3 years to go back and reclaim that money, and they've told us no. So my question would be, even if we created an RTA, because if we claim that money back, then Hampton Roads isn't going to be made whole. So who's going to make up their
Well,
shortfall?
it's not their money. They're getting money that's out of taxes. And
I know.
Projects. It's not about being made whole.
McPike's
Well, but that's why they got the money from Stafford to begin with. It was $1 million.
McPike's bill in the Senate committee only failed by 1 vote.
Right. No, I
So-
agree with
That
you.
was Richard Stewart.
Yeah. So if
Welcome.
if the thing goes through in the future, Hampton Roads will have to look somewhere else to fund that shortfall. But it's not a shortfall. It's money that's raised here that has been given to them. It's not like it's their money.
And it's not for operations and
It's your
maintenance. It's for improvements.
Right. I understand. I'm just saying, how do we validate that we actually will get to collect that money? Because
Well,
it's,
the bill specifies where the money comes from and where it goes through to.
okay.
For the person that drafts the bill, or if somebody here gets elected to the Virginia, one of the levels of the Virginia government,
Delegate or Senate?
you can draft the bill yourself, right?
Right.
No names.
Okay.
named.
They'd ask
Anyway.
us first
But-
before doing
but
that,
the-
though.
well,
I would ask you.
The point though is that we didn't get asked in the past, and
No.
it only failed by 1 vote.
It
So
always happened to us.
we should.
And it is
Wait.
going, in my humble opinion, it is coming back without a shadow of a doubt. And I think that we need to be proactive this time. You look at those numbers up there, you know, while there's nobody around this table that wants additional taxes, we don't. But we have to look at things from a regional standpoint, and we need to have everything that you guys have just described here. And I feel like, do we want to craft it and make it the way we want it? Or do we want somebody else to craft it and we're going to get stuck with whatever they want? Or we're going to be jockeying down there trying to make tweaks here and there and maybe at the last minute and not get the support that we need. And then we're going to have something that we don't like. So, but anyway, let's go back to what Ian presented and what your all's thoughts are.
It's a case of mix and match, really.
Right.
So you can look at
Right.
all of these options and say, we don't like any of them, but if we take a bit of A and a bit of 7 and a bit of 3, we can, so you can craft it however you want to. But we asked UMW to give us actual numbers. Yes, they're projections, but actual numbers to give you a feel for what's involved, right? And then the slide from Central Virginia was just to show you What do you do with the money? Well, you can give half of it back to the locality in which it was raised so that they could do their local projects, or 40% or some other number. You can set aside to that option for transit if you wish to or not. Northern Virginia didn't, but the other two did. Central Virginia set aside an amount for transit. You can pick those, so however you feel. The question, I think the first question we have to answer is this something we should be looking at seriously and starting to work on proposals?
Could we take the McPike bill and work with the jurisdictions, the 3 jurisdictions, on maybe a draft of what we could live with?
Sure.
And maybe that's the way forward, because I think most of us are visual people. And I think, the one that Josh Cole proposed 2019, 2020, I forget, 2020 maybe, was really, really bad. McPike's was not as bad. And so I think our board probably has an appetite to do it if it's done the right way, and not imposing specific taxes on residents and then falling to the localities. And as long as we could work it through this organization.
What I really like about that Pike proposal was that it does claim back existing taxes, which at the moment are going to build that tunnel in Hampton Road.
Yeah.
It claims back existing taxes, and I think that is the benefit.
Yeah.
The thing that's also been pointed out to me, though, is that 15 million, just scroll up, please, to the slide with the, the 15 million in the state allocation. If that dries up, then McPike's proposal isn't enough because you're only going to get the 2 smaller amounts. And that is going to be a very small amount to fix the big problem. And I'll give you an idea of a big problem. In Caroline County, I don't think there's anybody that's arrived, but Caroline County, they've won smart scale applications to widen the road in Ladysmith that crosses over the I-95. So that's being constructed right now. It's widening it from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. Either side, I believe, of the highway, if I'm correct.
Just between 95 and around.
Yeah. But then you get to the I-95 bridge and it goes back, the bridge is only 2 lanes. And so that county is really concerned that in the future, it's going to be a massive bottleneck. Where are they going to fund 150 million, or I don't know what the number is, to widen that 2-lane bridge to a 4-lane bridge? If they don't win a smart scale round, there's no money to do that, right?
But would the
I don't
money
speak
from
for,
an RTA be even enough for that? I
Well,
don't think it would.
the point about this is you can use it as
You could
leverage.
right.
It becomes a 20% match of a federal grant.
Right.
Or you can leverage smart scale. You can buy the bucket in smart scale if you put enough up front. If you put up 30% of the money up front, your cost benefit analysis is much better than 100%. Please give me all the money. Same thing with if Spotsylvania wants to build that interchange on Harrison Road. I know people have different views on it, whatever, but if you do, you've got to come up with a lot of money, right? And this would be a way to get at least some of the money so that you can do either a smart scale application or a federal grant to get the bulk of the money, right?
Right.
So this is the seed capital.
Tim.
So, sorry. I'm too much.
And what I understand,
Advisor.
Madam Chairwoman, is you can also use proceeds to make debt service obligations from a county, for example, or the city. So annually, you can get a $100 million project, only produce $5 million annually from this pot to pay, but that's enough to pay debt service on a 20-year bond. So locality may have to borrow a lot of money. They can use resources to make that obligation over 15, 20-year period.
For big project.
Does anybody have, because I know we'll talk about this for 6 hours. Anybody have an issue if we allow you to kind of draft legislation based on the McPike bill, but kind of strengthening it where it was weak and then getting it to the localities? Because right after the election, they all have to drop their bills by January 13th or 11th or time in January.
I'm happy to do that. I have one question for you because I need the guidance. Do you want me to include a retail tax at a lower rate or a gas tax or none of the above or all of the above? Because whichever options you want, we can put in the draft, right?
I think you need to make it like a menu option, and then that's where we come back and figure out with our state legislature which one because there are some where it might fail based on what type of tax you're proposing.
Right. So I want to go to Tim and then back to Kathy.
Well, I would agree. I think what I just heard from Mr. Fanush is that, yes, let's have some lattice with that. I would even suggest that we create zero tax rates across the board. And maybe that's all we accomplish in year one, create an RTA with no tax in place. We adopt that later. I think that's the viable approach.
I think your legislators will balk at creating a piece of legislation which has.
Well, but it
zero.
claims back all the funds that we've lost. But you're right, it may be. So that might be an item in the menu.
And
I think they want to see a little bit of skin in the game.
still have a lot of work to do on which projects flow, but I think if we work on that, in my opinion, if we work on that first, we'll be doing this for the next 20 years, trying to figure out the projects to move forward. I only say 20 years because I've been at the state for 20 years loosely. So I think if we set the RTA first, if that's achievable, then we got something to work from. The community understands that the world is not falling apart because we've adopted an RTA. We just have the ability to advance rates and projects over time. I think that's the first step. That's the big hurdle. That's what we've been debating for a long time. Let's see if we can't get an RTA.
Right.
Very loosely crafted without rates, because the rates is what's going to scare you.
Right.
Or we can put options so that you can pick and choose. And if you all agree on only one tax, then that's the one, right?
All right, Kathy.
So for King George, I can't speak for Caroline. One of the things I would suggest of whatever we come up with a framework, if you want to have it done before January, you need to come to a board meeting in December and we can make sure we invite all the new elected officials so they can familiarize it and you can answer questions, because I think that'll be a big hurdle.
And we do it in January because in December I'm going to be out of the country. My first visit ever to South Africa since I've been here, and I've been here 5 years. So I want to.
That's fine. January is fine, but just to come and be available to ask a lot of questions.
I'm here the whole of January. I'll come every night of the week in January. That's what you.
And you might have a lot of questions because there'll be at least 2 new people.
I might have to bring somebody else to help.
Well, and what you really might want to do in that situation is really sit down with people. You know, if their county administrator has a meeting, you know, or some kind of a pre-planning meeting with them and then present to the board. Chip, what are your thoughts back here? I mean, you've been around, you've been around a while.
I'm an old guy. Yakubowski, I think you're right on target, you know, being the regional planning kind of person here. I think without that being able to show the transit-oriented type developments, I mean, that's how you build the density. And this region's lucky. You've already got rail. You've got certain infrastructure in place. Now, if you can just get the density near those points, you're eliminating a lot of the traffic and congestion. I won't even go into the political will then to approve the developments that try to go into those regions. But that's, you know, you got to start at the first. So I really appreciate that part of it. A concern I would have, Tim, is I'm familiar with an area that created, the General Assembly gave the region a regional transit authority, but no funding with it. And that authority sat there for roughly 10 years, unable to ever get the funding. So they had the ability to create it, but no funding. So nothing ever happened with it. I would think trying to get something initially would be very, very important. The other is just making sure that it's the whole region and not just the MPO region, because one of the concerns we would have is more in the Caroline County area of you would just start to push between what happens in the urban area of FAMPO and what's happening in Richmond. You're just going to push a bottleneck to areas that can improve if Caroline never sees improvements.
Right.
And that's not doing you any good, because in people's minds of passing through, they just see it as Fredericksburg.
Right.
They know that's the area that got stopped on the interstate. It doesn't matter what jurisdiction it's in. Only other one, in having our CTB member in the audience, I never miss a chance when I have a CTB member to lobby, is that to help pursue this for the Caroline and King George counties, FAMPO has money to pursue something like this. The rural counties don't have the luxury of seeing these admin dollars increase. The rural counties have gotten the same amount of admin funding from VDOT for 20 years, 25 years, and it doesn't increase with population. It's been 58,000 solid for 2 decades.
20 years.
Yes. So they don't have a lot of resources to help draft legislation. And by law, Ian can't spend the MPO money in the rural areas. So I just throw that out. There is some massaging and things that we do to make these happen. But I just wanted to get that out, looking out for the
So-
rural counties.
Okay, so is that something you could help facilitate
Yes.
with Ian with
Yes.
the rural areas?
You definitely would.
Okay, all right. Chris?
Yeah, if I can, and first of all, I just want everybody to know, I'm not for the dense urban. I mean, I appreciate the accolades, but,
Same.
but I'm not for turning Spotsy any more dense than we currently are. We have to catch up to where we need to be. Two things. One is, and I agree, Tim, we can't wait on the plan. I agree with that because we'll sit here for 20 years. You're right. But I think that we need to tie the plan to the funding because as soon as we get money, and no offense to everybody in here, but we're all elected officials. As soon as money is there, we have things that rise to the top. And if you don't agree on those before the funding gets there, you have, a fight that can be a little nasty. It's happened in the past. So let's not do that. Let's at least all, as best as we can, come together and say, this is the direction we want to go. These might be the different avenues, but we can't just have anything sitting out there because when you come to pick that project, once the money is there, I don't want to fight with my neighbors at all. And then secondly, I will say this, that I was told 14 years ago when I thought it was a bad idea for Spotsy to join VRE because of the gas tax, that you need funding somewhere. You got to find funding somewhere. If you don't find funding somewhere, where are you going to get it? Now we've moved on beyond the gas tax to now a regional tax. And because the problem is you'll never have enough money to do it. So we don't have a plan of what we want to do. We don't have goals of what we want those things to accomplish, but yet we're trying to raise all this money to do that, whatever that might be, and we don't have that. And I think that is key to any of this. I don't mind even sitting on our RTA for 5 years until we come up with the project that we want to do that will fund it.
I think that what we should do is what one of the other regions did, which is to come up with a list of 5 or 7 initial projects that we can commit to as a group.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Things that
Yeah.
we start with, and then when those 5 projects are well on their way to completion, by then the board has developed some maturity and can start saying, what's the 8th project, what's the 9th project, and then you add to that so that there is some agreement in the beginning.
And we need to have some criteria that uses.
Yes.
Because what I'm saying is I don't want in the
Yeah.
future for Stafford to go to Fredericksburg and say, hey, can you support my project? I'll support yours. And it just gets into that whole fight again.
Well, now
So
was one of my,
you just tonight approved the CMAC and STGB methodology, which is a complicated way that we use to score projects so that there's some objectivity in which projects get chosen to be funded in CMAC and STGB, and we can do the same thing for this process. Get some criteria together by which we judge which are good projects and which are bad projects.
And that is fine because we also have to, as elected officials, if we were to do something like this, we then have to stand behind it and tell the people that put us into office why we are going to be spending their money and what is it going to accomplish. And I'm not comfortable just saying, hey, we're going to raise your taxes, trust us.
No.
Take care of it in the future.
why we're going to do a project in Spotsylvania and not do a project in Stafford. We need to have a process that we understand and communicate to the public that we can all stand behind. I think that is really the most important thing.
And one last thing, I'm sorry to keep,
That's fine.
because I think that people don't care if it's Fredericksburg, Swansea, Stafford. They want to be able to move, because how many times have you asked people, where do you live? We have the Fredericksburg zip code,
Oh, right.
and it's like, well, we're in Fredericksburg. It's like, no, you live in Spotsylvania. Well, what? So that kind of stuff needs to go out the window. We need to start, but we also, with transit doesn't work in rural, it doesn't work in rural Swansea. It needs to work where it works. And let's make it work where it works. And I'm completely fine with that, but it needs to be a dual system. We can't, everybody out of your car, we're only doing buses. It has to work where it works. We have to expand roads, do the connections that we need, but they have to, and it's never going to fix a problem, but it's going to make it better. And that's what we need to explain to our citizens, because they're paying for all this.
Of course, and I mean, and I wasn't saying, I said I was.
I just want this on record, that's all.
Of course, but I do think, not like we've ever been worried about that with you.
Oh, no.
But if I may, Madam Chair,
Sure.
this is why I want to bring, GWRC into this as part of that land use plus transportation discussion. Because you talk about, we need to explain why we're spending X amount of dollars. And, spoiler, if we can have a conversation about land use and denser land use patterns, it costs less tax dollars to do so. And we can show tons of studies that have proven that time and time again. So I think when we talk about the efficiency, you have to bring in land use, because otherwise everything turns into a road expansion, which can only handle so much growth. And we know we're going to grow beyond whatever the projections say, because that's what we've done for the past 20 years. And that has to come into this. So the question I do have about the RTA and what has been done in the other three so far is around membership, and who is what criteria do they use? Is it elected officials only? Is it not any elected officials, but are they appointed? What have the other RTAs done for membership?
That's one of the things I would change in my bill. The people that he's put on that board were just like, I think what he came up with. He refers to things that don't exist. He refers to a long-range plan for PD16. There's no such thing. We had to carve it in two. There's one for the real guys. All of that stuff we'll tidy up.
Yeah.
And then you can look at the list and go, that doesn't look right to us. We think these are the kinds of people, because we don't name anyone. You have the positions of people that should be on this board.
Right. I mean, because to Crystal's point, yeah, I think that's the.
We can tidy up. But to Chris's point, my last comment is, the problems that we're having are problems of a growing region. Not every region in the United States has got this kind of problem, right? There's some places in the country that are losing people. And there are places where it's static, the same number of people, and their transportation needs don't increase as rapidly. Our needs are increasing rapidly, and we're getting this problem of it's never enough, because there's no end to the growth of the population here, because we're between Richmond and DC, and there's not a lot you can do about that. Spot growth increased during COVID.
Rate of growth
increased. So the rate of growth you were growing at turned a corner and it went up even faster during COVID. So it's a problem of growth. The answer to the person who says, but why do we never catch up? It's because we continually grow. So we build a road for the people that are here now, and then the people here in 5 years' time, they clog up the road.
Okay, hang on. I got Lori and then Bob.
So, I just want to bang this drum once again to Chris's point and to my constituents' point. And because we talk about density, we talk about land use. We are in a position right now, in my estimation, and Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong, please, because you've been at this longer than me, where our growth is huge. We have over 10,000 units, I believe, that are approved and not have come to fruition. We have other things coming up that are high density, mixed use, which mixed use has not worked out to the way that it's supposed to. And at some point,
The hospital is coming.
You, right,
I
but at
just saw-
some point you have to say, and you can't say a moratorium on growth, because that's not gonna happen, it's not realistic.
It's not legal.
But you, right, exactly, but you have to say, we need to make sure we're smart with what we're doing. And, you know, I understand the point of, here's the train station, everybody take the train. Well, the train still has not recovered from COVID. And it probably will never recover from COVID because work patterns have changed. And that's the reality. And so, I mean, we sort of disagree on how to address this, but in Spotsy, particularly the Lee Hill district, we're the fastest growing district. There is not an appetite for, you know, a little village over by the train station and just keep moving and moving and doing that. There's not that appetite there for that. Because what we have seen, it not come to fruition in the way that it was sold.
Okay.
So I think, you know, when we talk about this stuff and we talk about the housing needs and the transportation needs, I don't know. I kind of have asked VRE, you know, what is it, how many people that live in that apartment building that right there, how many are getting on VRE? Is it real or is it an imagined thing? You know, how many people are using the bus system? How many, you know, and so I get that we have a road problem, we have a transportation problem, we have a money problem because it costs so much. But I want, you know, everyone to understand where Spotsy is, at least my district. I'll speak for my district.
Well, and I think that's a really good point, Lori. And I think that even though you and Jason, I'm just picking on you two, have different perspective on density and what might be right for your community, doesn't have anything to do about whether or not we can get where we all need to go for an RTA. I think that all of that will play into it. Bob,
Whether
and then
Whether you have a road, a bus, or a train, you need the money, right?
Well, to Chris's point, that's what he was told when VRE came in, is we need funding source. Okay, well, now we're gonna put a gas tax on there. So now we have a gas tax. Now we're going back to the citizens to tax them again on something else. I mean, where does it really, I mean, everything that's on there is a tax.
right.
So just an observation, having lived in multiple communities who've gone through this, including passing $1 billion sales tax. This is a unique circumstance where it may not be up to you, meaning you don't have to go to the voters. This isn't a referendum. This is occurring in Richmond. And the reality is you'll be judged on how it gets spent because ultimately you're decision makers. But right now it's a revenue generation machine. And as we talk about, when's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the second best time right now? So from just a realpolitik moment of this is the money is going to be raised. Right now is your number one opportunity to influence it. And this is just me observing other communities attempting to create sales taxes. And when you're selling it to the voters, you have to say, this is what we're paying for. This is a scenario where you don't actually have time to get that list, but you have enough projects in the pipeline and demand that operationally today, you probably have, I'm guessing, 10 major projects that could absorb funding for this?
Easily.
So that is the good news from that perspective. What will be the ugly part of this will be deciding down the road, how do you decide what gets funded, I think, after that first tranche of projects get completed. And the good news is you have ample time and you've had other authorities like Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. You'll have the Richmond one, I forgot the name suddenly.
Central Virginia.
Central Virginia. Central Virginia. So they'll have you'll have opportunities to learn lessons from them. But that's just from having seen the sausage get made in some ugly, ugly ways. And also the lawsuits that came with it and the clawbacks from the misuse. There's been a lot of things like that. But for right now, you're trying to fund major programs that you just don't have the money for. And if someone else is going to pull the lever for you, probably your hand should be a little more in control over that. And again, and I can't say this enough, good or bad, you don't have to go to your citizens for it. You're going to be judged by how it's spent, whether or not you actually are in control of whether or not the taxes get raised. unless you decide to fight it, and then it becomes, you'll never get the revenues.
Right,
So we should control our own destiny and go now.
right. Chris, did you have something else that you wanted?
I've said enough.
Oh,
I don't
okay.
think that-
All right, anybody else? So,
So just clarify for me what the mandate is, and then I'll
Correct.
do whatever it is you.
But I was laughing at her.
Oh, okay.
Show of hands for RTA.
yeah, let's, I think that, since we really don't have an item on the agenda, if we could just kind of do a straw poll for those that would be interested in gathering additional information and having Ian and Chip do the work with the various localities and look at the components of an RTA.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm sorry. So what you would be giving us then is something kind of like a menu option so that we can play with what that would look
What
like.
I'm going to try and get you, and this is subject to perhaps some legal assistance, is a draft bill that has got in the middle of it options, so that if you don't like a gas tax, you can strike that off, right? So in other words, draft a bill, and then in the middle it'll say including this or not including this, so that you can go to your localities and discuss it, right? And take off something you don't like or
Yeah.
add something you do like, etc.
Just really quickly, on that, so I guess we need to be able to see that at our, what month is it? At our October meeting. Because we, like in Stafford, we do our legislative dinner in December, at the beginning of December with our delegates. And we would love to be able to share that with them and kind of get feedback from our board at that time as well. I'm just speaking for Stafford specifically on that one, just as a timing perspective. So I think time is of the essence just to get that, and then we can kind of workshop it, because I think the general consensus is we know that Jeremy McPike is going to put that bill in, and it's likely he's going to be elected. So,
So we'll draft something and bring it back here next month. Is
yes,
that
but,
okay?
and I will say, so I'm sorry to
Oh,
interrupt.
no, I just want to throw hands.
So,
Vote on some
we tracked it really closely in Stafford last year, and our consultant lobbyist, Julia, oh my God, what's her last name? Why am I forgetting? Because all I can think of is Julia Holmes in our county admin. Julia Hammond, yep, there we go. Julia Hammond was really, like, she could help you write it, honestly. So if you can send maybe Meg an email, she'll connect you to Randy and Julia, and she'll definitely help you get that done. If everybody's okay with that strategy, I don't want to think Stafford's
Who
control.
was Julia with? Just kidding.
Cozen.
Yep, Cozen O'Connor.
How's that gonna affect, since we don't have a vote here? So it's
Then-
Then you
included,
don't get to talk. No, I'm just kidding.
that's all right.
You are also a non-voting member of this body, so I'm going to send it to you also.
Okay.
I'm not going to hide it anyways, don't worry.
No, because I'll have to socialize.
I need to send it to Caroline County as well, so, and I'm happy, I mean, we could present it at GWRC board if you'd like as well. It depends on duplication. Some of you don't like to see.
Well, I
something
think for
twice, but-
something as important as
Yeah.
this, you should present it at GWRC.
Yeah, at least, like next week, just have it as an item, as like, this is what was discussed at FAMPO about
Right.
this potential for an RTA.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think it'll go into our potential land use
Right.
discussion as well.
Right. And then even though we all individually have dinners with our legislative
For us.
people, we can also have one here with the legislative people as it relates to the RTA, if we have anything that we want to iron out after people are elected. I think
Some
for
of us
us,
don't have legislative dinners.
okay, that's,
We don't even have a legislative aid or program, so.
okay.
even-
Well, we'll work with everybody. We'll make sure it all is communicated and
Higher.
happens, okay?
And that's something we've already been discussing in a general way of doing that with the GWRC on an annual basis, because we know not everybody does.
Yeah. So I'll draft something with options presented to both boards when we get started, and then you take the next thing, like, do you like it, do you not like it, do you want to take it further, do you not want to take it further? So it'll be step one. It looks like most people are in favor of it.
Okay, so let's see the straw poll. Anybody opposed? Seems like it was a very productive conversation and everybody is supportive until we move to the next step. Okay, thank you, everybody. Great.
That it? We get to go now?
Not quite yet. Sorry, the report. We are on that.
Just wait till my.
So the report is the
Babble.
long report that I sent you. It's not that long. It's only about
I know.
6 or 8. That's the same topic. It's the-
Oh, okay, everybody
It's the
can,
report.
yeah,
The slides I presented, so you didn't have to read all
right,
this.
right. Everybody, just remember the report, that's the FRA and UMW report is in the back, correct?
Correct. It's
Yep,
in
we
the
all
back.
saw that.
Correct.
Okay.
Every word.
Correspondence?
We don't have any correspondence to give you this month.
Okay, staff and agency reports?
No new staff members that we need to tell you about, but there are some agents.
Marcy?
So Michelle Shropshire is on a temporary for several months. So Kathy Coffey will be sitting in her spot. And there was an announcement earlier this week. The secretary's office will not be conducting the fall meetings this year. So they're only legislated that you have to have them in the spring. And several secretaries have been nice enough and had them in the fall. This year, he has decided against that. We give no reason. We were just told no fall meetings, so you don't have to prepare a letter or prepare to go to any of those meetings.
He didn't want to hear from Meg Bomke again. There she is. There she is.
He likes Meg, so whenever we need something,
Oh,
don't send
yeah,
me,
right.
send Meg.
Yeah,
Because he seems
yeah.
to like her.
All right.
Right to sleep.
Okay, Kathy, welcome. I think we all know you, so. Okay, board member and chair comments. Any board member comments? Monica?
No, I don't think I have any.
Okay, Lori? Jason?
No.
He knows I'll
Crystal?
chair right outside.
Kathy? Bob? Chris? Tim? Marcy? You already had your
Not a
chance all night.
Getting no chance.
Okay, I don't have any comments either. I just want to thank everybody for being here.
Yes,
Productive
thank you.
conversation. Please bring Caroline County into the loop. I'm sure they wanted to be here, but had reasons that they couldn't.
Good.
They're very important to Planning District 16. So, and our next meeting will be October 16th. All right? Meeting adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.